Protesters have been flooding the streets of Iran since the death of General Qasem Soleimani. But the chants of death to America have changed to anger, increasing anger against the regime since the Iranian government admitted to shooting down Ukrainian Airlines Flight 752 with a surface-to-air missile, killing 176 passengers and crew, among them 57 Canadians. Canada is demanding a significant role in the investigation on the ground in Iran. 2 investigators from the Transportation Safety Board are in Tehran this evening. Another team of 2 is on standby to look into the flight data recorders wherever they end up being. While the investigation is being led by Iran's aviation authority, Canada says it will push, along with allied partners like Ukraine, the US, and the UK, for as much information as possible to be made public.
The world deserves to know how and why events unfolded as they did. I can assure you that we will continue to advocate for a full explanation of what happened and why, and we will speak up if we feel those answers aren't coming.
How much access will investigators have to the crash site and black box information, and when might the victims' families have answers? Marc Garneau is, of course, the Minister of Transport. He joins us here in studio. Hi, Minister. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Vasha.
Thanks very much for making some time for us today. I want to start off by asking you about some of the revelations that we learned from the Transportation Safety Board. And the first is that Kathy Fox said that the investigators, the Canadian investigators, it looks like are being permitted to play a more active role in the investigation than would normally be permitted. She specifically pointed to the idea that they are going to be participating in the download and analysis of the black box data. What might that, I mean, we know the plane was shot down, so what might we learn from that?
It's very, very significant because there are still some details. Yes, Iran admitted to shooting down this airplane, but we want to know exactly what happened on the airplane in the last seconds. We know that after the strike occurred, that the airplane did continue. It went into a sort of a turning pattern. We don't know exactly what was going on board. And in the interests of learning about all of those details, it's important to have a fulsome investigation. And we're very glad that the Transportation Safety Board has 2 people in Tehran. We're going to have permission to look at the debris, the remnants of the aircraft, and secondly, that 2 will participate, as you said, in the downloading and analysis of the data.
You're right. Ms. Fox also mentioned that the wreckage, that Canadian investigators would be allowed in to see the wreckage. How unusual is that? And what might the wreckage say that you wouldn't get from the black box?
Well, it's over and above what is normally allowed through the protocols that exist with ICAO. Canada had 57 nationals on board, so we're allowed to be there, but typically it would have been more as an observer and to have access to the data, but not more than that. But we made the point in the last few days, the Government of Canada, that it was extremely important for Canada to participate in a more fulsome manner, particularly because of the fact that there were 57 Canadians, but also because of our expertise. And so, as Kathy Fox mentioned, we will be there to see the download and also participate in the analysis.
Do you have any timeline on any of that, particularly the download?
Hopefully as soon as possible. Of course, the black boxes are with the Iranians. They have to control the whole process, but we are going to be ready when that time occurs.
From my understanding, there's kind of 2 separate types of investigations that take place. One is very much focused on the plane itself and aviation safety, and then the other is one that zeroes in more on culpability. Are the TSB investigators more focused in on the plane safety thing? Like, at what point will Canadians be able to assign culpability? And by that, I mean, I know the Iranians said they're the ones that shot them down, but they're insisting it was a mistake.
The TSB will only focus on what happened to the airplane. But we as Canadians are far more, are also interested in, all of the other factors surrounding it. So there's a larger picture that Canada is very interested in.
But how will we be able to ascertain whether or not that's the case if the investigators that Canada has over there are only focused on plane safety?
Well, the TSB will be focused on what happened to the airplane, but the Government of Canada is focused on also getting answers to those other questions.
The other big question I keep hearing through our coverage here from a lot of viewers and otherwise is, why was this plane allowed to fly in the airspace given the conflict that was ensuing at that very moment? Is that a question that your government has any answers on at this point?
No, and it is a very valid question because obviously when Iran decided to deploy its defense batteries, but at the same time aircraft were allowed to continue to take off both before and after the Flight 752. It brings into question why was the airspace open, and why was this allowed to happen?
Ultimately, is it the Iranian government that would have, I know that I don't know if it's an express decision they make to keep them open, or is it the Iranian government ultimately that signs off on keeping the airspace open? Like, who is responsible?
Each country is responsible for its own airspace. They make the decision as to whether to close it. Obviously, airlines that may fly in and out of a particular airport can make their own decisions about whether they want to go into a particular area, but it is the country itself that makes the decision about closing airspace.
Has there been any kind of conversation, including the one between the leader of that country and the leader of our country, that involved those questions?
Not specifically, not at this point, but those are things that we're interested in knowing the answers to.
Okay. The other thing that was revealed in the press conference from the Transportation Safety Board was that they won't be revealing the names or identities of any of the Canadians who are over there to take part in the investigation. And they named security as an issue. How concerned is the government about the safety of those individuals?
We're always concerned about the safety of our nationals, and of course, as you know, Canada has not had relations with Iran since 2012. In fact, the call that the Prime Minister made to President Rouhani yesterday or the day before was historical in that sense, in terms of the two of them speaking. But at the moment, because of the current situation that does exist, whenever our nationals are in a country such as Iran, we obviously have to be concerned about security.
So nothing specific about this instance that raises the security level, like the level of concern?
Well, the Middle East at the moment is an area of increased tension, so it would be prudent for Canada to take appropriate measures.
What about the repatriation of the victims and particularly their bodies? I have read in the Globe and Mail that 17 families are currently in negotiations with the Iranian government. There is said to be some difficulty where dual citizenship is concerned, of course, because Iran doesn't recognize it. Can you offer us and our viewers an update about that process?
What I can tell you is that is a #1 priority, the repatriation of remains for families that want to bring those remains back to Canada. That is why Minister Champagne is working through the consular side of things to clarify the situation with respect to that. Minister Mendicino is working with families on getting them visas. Some may want to go over there and as part of the process. Those are things that we're trying to address, what families want. The issue of dual nationality is something that has to be resolved in the process. From our point of view, if they are Canadian citizens, then they are Canadian citizens.
I know it's being worked on, but at this juncture, is the Iranian government standing in the way of the repatriation of the bodies of those Canadian citizens?
I think it's too early to tell at this point.
Okay.
Those are details that need to be worked out with more discussion.
The Prime Minister, in an earlier interview today on Global News, said that compensation will need to come. In the 1988 case involving Iran and the United States, it took nearly a decade for that compensation to come to the families of the victims. Is that a timeline that Canada would be okay with?
First of all, I will reiterate what you just said. Yes, compensation is something that Canada feels is owed to the families of the victims in this particular case. When a situation like this occurs, the decision about who must compensate who has to be worked out, and that can take time. Obviously, we want it to be done as quickly as possible.
A decade?
A decade would appear to be too long a period of time. I'm not a lawyer, but these things can be complicated and have to work their way through the courts, and there may be many, many claims that come into a complicated situation such as occurred here. So I couldn't tell you how long, but certainly from our point of view, for justice, for the families of the victims, we would like to see this done expeditiously.
Before I let you go, is your government considering, given Iran's role in all of this, whether by mistake or otherwise, as the investigation will determine or could determine, is your government considering additional punitive action against the country? And by that specifically, I mean additional sanctions.
So when we have figured out exactly what happened, both to the plane and the other factors surrounding it, Canada will make decisions, but it would be premature for us at this point to say we're going to do this or that when we don't have all the facts before us.
But nothing's ruled out at this point.
At this point, we want to make sure, as the Prime Minister said, that justice is done. We want to make sure that compensation is done. we have to look after the interests of the families and friends of 57 people who lost their life. That is our number one priority. But surrounding all of this is we do want justice. We do want to get to the bottom of it. And that's why we are going to continue pushing until we get all those answers.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister Garneau.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And earlier today, I asked Canada's Minister of Justice and Attorney General David Lametti if the government will pursue compensation for Canadian families at the International Court of Justice. Have a listen to his answer.
It's too early to answer that question. Obviously, as Minister of Justice, I'm at the table with my colleagues around the ministerial table. Department of Justice will be involved to making sure that Canadians will get justice. The families will get justice, but it's too early. It's too early for me to pronounce on what those possible measures might be.
Understood. Regarding the timeline, there is some reporting via Reuters this morning that a number of the countries, including Canada, involved that had victims involved in the plane crash, are meeting to discuss the pursuit of legal action. Is that something you're a part of?
As I said, there are a number of different ministers and ministries at the table in terms of the Canadian response, and the Minister of Justice will be at that table.
So you are going to participate in those meetings? Is that correct?
I'm going to participate in the Canadian government's response. I won't say more than that.
Okay, and is there a timeline?
I can't say more than that.
Understood. Is there a timeline? I know it's early, but I'm asking because there are a number of victims' family members who have spoken out wondering what it looks like going forward. And is there some sort of timeline by which your government might make those decisions, or is it dependent on basically how Iran acts going forward?
Again, it all depends on how Iran acts in general, but I really can't answer precise questions on timelines.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.